Before we start this podcast, I want to say that every project I have pretty much has a village behind it, and this one is no exception. I want to thank the patrons who stepped in on my Kickstarter to really make sure that this got off the ground. Denise Grady, Caden White Wadham, Amanda Peak, Todd A. Davis, Jay Grant, and Corey Watson. Without you guys, I wouldn't be sitting here talking with the awesome guest that I'm about to talk to. Thank you so much. So, full disclosure, it's our second time recording because the first time the audio just didn't come through. But I'm thinking that we'll be able to pull a good recording out of this. So thank you for sitting with me a second time. This is
no worries.
Yeah.
Welcome to It's Your Loss podcast, where raw stories of resilience and healing are told, all while uncovering and destigmatizing the diverse symptoms of loss.
Welcome back to the podcast. If you missed last month's episode, well, it's your loss. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, and I have with me author extraordinaire, just an all-around cool person. I think she's done 2 books now. Is that right?
Yeah.
2 books. It's Kat Higgs Coulthard. Hello. How are you? Welcome.
I'm doing great. So happy to be here. Thanks, Michael.
Not a problem. But I'll go ahead and ask you the same thing that I ask everybody else. Kat, what did you lose?
Well, I've lost so many things in my life, but the core memory that I still am processing is my house burned down when I was in 5th grade. So in that moment, we lost everything except the people that were valuable in our lives. We lost, our home where we were living, all our possessions, and the sense of community that I was living in that area. When the house burned down, we couldn't live there anymore. So that was also a huge loss.
That is a huge loss. That's a huge loss sandwich. There's a lot of layers to that, and one of the things that feel like that parallels is a big part of your book called Junkyard Dogs, where the main character's house burns down, and you find out more about it as the story goes on. And I feel like it's interesting that you say this happened to you in 5th grade and you're still processing it now. And I'm sure they're like writing that was a point of catharsis and everything. But before we jump all the way into the deep end with that, you mentioned on your sign-up sheet that you like 2 games. One is Centipede, which I couldn't find a way to do a 2-player Centipede over Zoom. I scratched my head furiously for that one for like 15 minutes before I gave up and landed on Battleship. And I don't know if you know this, but the actual idea of Battleship is a very old game. It originated in France, and it was called L'Attaque back then, and the version of it anyway, of just like people drawing dots and trying to guess where the dots were and trying to sink ships and whatnot. And so I was like, we can do that on paper.
Yeah.
We can go old school. So no one's ever going to see this because I'm not doing the, well, actually they might. They see an ad for this. But I gave you a printout for Battleship. I have mine. We have placed our ships. And now throughout the thing, just, we'll go back and forth. We'll do letter number combinations and see just how many hits we get. We're not even like measuring ships here. We're just going to see at least how many hits we get. And as you are the guest, I'll go ahead and let you shout out the first combination.
Okay, let's see. How about a 10?
A 10. That would be a miss. All right. And I'll come back at you in just a little bit. Just real quick, when did you, like, Battleship, you said is one of your favorite games. Is it one of your favorite games from childhood? Is it something that you discovered later?
Yeah, I grew up, I just have one sibling, and so 2-player games were kind of the norm in our household. Our parents would play with us sometimes, but they usually wanted to play games like Monopoly or Euchre. So Battleship was something my brother and I played quite a bit.
Yeah, Monopoly and Euchre, those are the real good games that young kids just want to dive into. Yeah. Property tax, please, Mom. Just
right.
You say that's 10%? Oh, I know exactly what that is. I'll come back with like I said, another shot here in a little bit. But let's talk about Junkyard Dogs for a minute, which is a wonderful book. The characters have depth. The stakes just always seem to be rising throughout there. But it starts from very much from a place of hurt, where this character is, still reeling from it. It seems like, even though that things are kind of settled for him. How much? Obviously, like I said, it's got to come from a point of catharsis. But how much of your own personal pain did you feel like you were putting into the character when you were creating Josh?
That's a great question. I feel like a lot of times writers hear this axiom about write what you know.
Hmm.
And so I really have struggled with that in my early writing career. I was writing a lot of autobiographical stuff. And I realized, my own life isn't necessarily all that interesting told intact as an autobiography or memoir, but my own emotional journey has a lot of relevance for what other people are going through and what they're experiencing. So I mined what I knew emotionally
Hmm.
and the questions that I had about why things happen, why there are losses in our lives to inform the characters that I was creating. So everyone in Junkyard Dogs is dealing with some type of loss, as is everyone in the real world.
They really
We've
are,
all
yeah.
lost, yeah, we've all lost something. So I wanted to think carefully about my own emotional journeys and how I could use that to inform Josh's emotional journey specifically. So
Okay.
with him, he's trying to define what family means and how to be who he is in a world where his family isn't the typical family, isn't what we would hope for in a family. So
Right.
he's dealing with that continual ongoing loss of losing his idealistic family. He doesn't have that. And then he does also lose his house. So that
Sure.
also informed it.
Yeah, and you said that pretty much everybody's dealing with loss in there, and you're right. Like even the from protagonist to antagonist, like everybody is dealing with some sort of loss, and you can tell who's doing it healthily and who is just riding the flames as far as they will go. Adds to the intensity of the story. I'm gonna go ahead and call it a shot here. I'm gonna say about C2.
Miss.
Nice. Okay. When did you said you were fifth grade, right?
Hmm.
Fifth grade when your house burned down. So tell me, like, if you're still processing it, you got to know what was your emotional standpoint? What was going through your head when you found that out?
I think it's kind of like the stages of grief. I
Mm.
didn't believe it at first. My dad showed up at school and a classmate came down to the cafeteria to tell me, "Hey, your dad's in the office." And I'm like, "Why?" So as a fifth grader, I trot down to the office and my dad is standing there and he just blurts it out, "Our house is on fire. I'm taking you home." So he went and got my little brother, who was 4 years younger than me, and put us in his truck and drove us home to watch our house burn down. It was so just incredibly surreal, like be there in the moment watching that happen. So it was just this, like, this isn't real, right? This is like a nightmare. Just
Right,
not even a nightmare in terms of fear. It's just numbness. Your first initial response is like, this can't be happening.
right. Mm. Wow, I can imagine. It's just out of curiosity, would you have rather have seen the aftermath or had seen the flames?
I have so many questions about my parents' choices in life. But I believe that we all do the best we know how to do in the moment.
Mm.
And so it's hard to say what's best for kids in that moment. I definitely have a lot of writing material now
Sure.
because of having watched that.
The
And
trauma barrel is full.
yes, and I think it was really helpful because my mother had been at work and she went straight to the house thinking that we were there.
Mm,
So for her to see us physically alive, okay, standing outside the
sure.
house,
Yeah.
that was really helpful versus, just my mom showing up and my dad saying, "Oh yeah, they're at school." It's really interesting how parents handle different things, though, because during 9/11, when all of that happened,
Hmm.
I had a child in kindergarten and a 2-year-old. And I called the school and I was like, "Should I come? What should I do?" And they're like, "No, leave your child here. We want their day to be normal."
Sure.
And so I showed up at the end of the day and my kid was the only kid left because every other parent
Oh.
picked their kid up. And I'm like, there is no win here.
It still didn't turn out to be a normal day. They were like, "Oh, where's everybody else going, huh?"
Yes.
Uh, wow. Well, and that, I mean, I've made questionable choices on other people's behalf when like traumatic events happen. Like we had a pet that passed away one time. It was sudden, it was sad. And in that time, my only thought was, and this was weird, it's a disconnected trains of thought that were just like hitting each other. And I thought at the time, my wife at the time was like, she has a hard time bending down. She's not going to be able to pet the dog. And then so I picked up the dog, which if you know anything about animals after they pass away, that's not a good idea. There are things that were contained, and all of a sudden they're not anymore. And the horrified response from her. She went, "What the hell are you doing?" I'm like, I wanted you to pet the dog, and like so we like to think we have our shit together as adults, but let's be honest, we're holding on.
No, I mummified a frog once from that same my child's bullfrog died while they were away at summer camp, and I thought,
Mhm.
they need to see their pet and say goodbye. So I put it in a little box because they were going to be home the next day. I'm like, I'll just take it out of the water so it doesn't degrade, and I'll save it. And then when they came home from camp, everything was so hectic and busy that I literally forgot for 3 days. And then when my child asked, I'm like, oh, let me show you Sparkle. So I go to open the little box I have Sparkle in, and it was legitimately like mummified, and
Oh
my
yeah.
child was so horrified.
Yeah, just dried out, desiccated frog husk. Yeah, oh my goodness.
Awful.
Why don't you call out a shot for your next shot? What you got?
Okay, let's try um A8.
A8. That is a miss as well. The house is burned down. Now, in Josh's story, he lost a significant member of his family, and I don't want to give it away in case anybody wants to read your book, which they should. Did you lose anybody in that, like pet or anything like that?
No, we were really fortunate that we were at school when it happened. It was kind of a departure from the norm, though, because normally my mother, she was a school bus driver. She would have left for work, and my dad would take us across the street to my
Mhm.
aunt and uncle's where we would catch the bus from there. And that day, my dad didn't take us over there. He drove us directly to school. So my mom thought when she called my aunt's
Oh
she
no.
and we weren't there, and my aunt didn't know why. She thought we were in the house, so it was terrifying for my mother until she got there.
Sure.
But yeah, but luckily nobody was home except our cats, and Frisky was my childhood cat, and
Oh,
she had just had a litter of kittens, and she carried them one by one out through a broken window. So we had a hero cat when I was a
that's
child. They all
that's a
survived.
good mom. I know I've had a lot of mom cats in my life, and none of them, like, some of them just like forgot half their litter. I'll be honest with you, this mom's a superhero. That is
Yeah.
amazing. Well, I'm glad. I'm glad you didn't lose any people, but I mean, obviously, like you said, there's a sense of security. Obviously, a loss of a whole lot of items when you're in fifth grade, items are your world. Like you got your parents and you got your items. So, what were some kind of like coping mechanisms? Like looking back, you probably didn't think that you didn't know the word coping mechanism probably in fifth grade, but like, what do you think like maybe you were developing around that time? Like, how were you handling it?
Not well, probably. As a kid, you don't realize how loss will continue to affect you later in life.
Sure.
So like I don't have baby pictures of myself or my brother.
Mm.
I don't have my parents' wedding photos. All of that stuff was destroyed. Any family heritage stuff that we had was all destroyed
Oh
unless
wow.
my grandparents had some of them. So we have a few baby pictures, but it was just what my grandparents had.
Sure.
But just your room, like you were saying, is the center of who you are as a person. It's where you cultivate your own artifacts and start to see yourself reflected back at you.
Yeah.
And that was just suddenly gone. And I was living, immediately going from my room, my comfort zone, into living in an apartment that had completely white walls and I had nothing to put on them. So luckily the community came together for us and donated a lot of things, and someone
Yeah, that's
donated
great.
some posters, and so I had stuff eventually, but it was a shock transition.
Sure. Big loss like that happens. It doesn't just like happen to you. Well, it happens to you, but the idea of it kind of shakes other people around you as well. Like, were you ever at school and like one of the kids come in and found out like their grandparent passed away or something like that during the school year, and all of a sudden like all these other kids are just like kind of awkward and they're like, "I'm so sorry for you," and then like somebody makes a joke and he's like, one person gets really angry. He's like, "Don't make fun of him. His grandma died." Were you develop like a stigma to the rest of the people at school at that point? Were you like all of a sudden the girl whose house burned down? And if so, like how long did that last?
I don't specifically remember that. The stigma that I remember is, hey, you're wearing my shirt, because a lot of the kids in the community had donated because we
Sure.
lost everything in a fire. So
And kids are
I
blunt.
had no, yeah, I had no clothes, I had no shoes, I only what I was wearing that day at school. So the kids who had donated things would sometimes comment on the fact that I was wearing what they would donated. And, as a child, you feel that kind of shame and humiliation because we were already living in poverty. And
Mm,
so then to like wearing other people's hand-me-downs was there was some real shame in that.
right,
Yeah, so that made it difficult.
man. From somebody who just suffers of social anxiety, and I feel like it's only gotten like kind of worse as I got an adult because I'm more self-aware than I ever was when I was younger. Um, yeah, that I'm getting like secondhand embarrassment now just thinking about how you were feeling at that time. That's rough. And by the way, G5.
Uh-oh. Wow, that is a miss.
Ooh, okay. All right. You were able to stay with your family afterwards. You got the apartment. You started building from there, which, I can only imagine what that did for you as far as like preparing for like later in life, like the fragility of knowing that everything could be gone in a moment. But in the book that you wrote, Josh's living situation seems to be like out of the frying pan into the fire type situation. So like when you decide to make that choice for him, or sometimes people let the characters have their own decisions, like where they wind up landing, but that's a whole different other conversation about writing. Was it for the story's sake that you wound up putting him in kind of like a more dire situation, or were you just feeling like it was the natural progression of things?
It seemed to be so the original story idea had him losing his home and having to go live with his uncle Stan, who is homeless at the time. They're living in an abandoned building. So that's where the story kernel started.
Right.
So I knew that was going to happen. And how he got there was where I had to think about how did he lose his home? Why is he all of a sudden living with his uncle Stan?
Okay.
And so that's where I was like, well, what could happen where you would lose your home? Someone could throw you out, your house could burn down. And the idea of the house burning down became such a pivotal theme in the book because it
Yeah.
it started to drive a lot of the choices that he made. It drove a lot of the character development of other characters, and then it wound up becoming a very strong plot point.
Yeah,
So
it was very much an anchor, an important anchor in that.
mhm.
And it's good that it's an event because an event spawns so many other small eddies that you can follow along. It gives you a little bit more play when it comes to writing, but also I think it gives more depth for you to play with in general. Speaking of Stan, I wanted to ask, was there a parallel of Stan in your life? Because Stan was a very layered and ultimately very dark person. Was there is there a Stan in your life?
well, that's a money question, isn't it?
It
Everybody's
is.
like, who did you fashion Stan after? Who did you fashion Gran
Oh,
after?
that's true.
Because
Gran was
Gran is also very dark
that's
character.
true.
And so the safe answer is no one, no one. But the truth is that, all the characters are amalgamations of people that I've had in my life at some point. Like the character might not be directly my uncle or directly this person, but I take facets of people I've met in my life
Mhm.
and I try to figure out who people are and why they're doing the things they're doing and the choices that they're making in the world. And so sometimes putting them in the form of a character or giving one trait to that character helps me it's almost like therapy. It's like, why did that person do that?
Sure.
Well, let's play with this idea a little bit and maybe I can change the story on the page a little bit even if I can't change it in real life. So Stan is not directly modeled after anyone.
Okay.
He actually was inspired by someone that I just saw walking on the street one day that was had very interesting mannerisms.
Hmm.
The gentleman was walking down the street in November, which is cold here in Southwest Michigan.
Sure.
He didn't have shoes on, and he was walking with his head tilted up toward the sky, which is an unusual way to walk, especially if you don't have shoes on
That is
along the side
true.
of a road.
Yeah.
I'd be looking at the ground to make sure I don't step on
Yeah.
anything. But then he was
Self-preservation and
rolling.
whatnot.
Yeah, he was rolling his hands as he walked and looking at the sky. And I just thought I really wanted to know more about that
Yeah.
individual. So that was the initial character sketch came from him. So nothing to do with his personality or, any life choices he had made other than
Sure.
that momentary
That snapshot
bit
that
of
you
him.
saw. Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, when they develop the coping mechanisms to deal with stress and or trauma, they wind up overanalyzing people. Mm, Try ultimately up to the point where they even try to do like mind reading, to think, hey, what is that person thinking just by the way that they're acting or moving. And I'm wondering if maybe you didn't pick up a little bit of that and kind of like squirreled it away to become this power of trying to amalgamate people. Like wondering if that might have something to do with it. I don't know. I've been going to therapy. These are things that I've been learning.
That's an interesting question, though, because I think I had that trait even before the fires
Hmm.
because my mother also drove Dial-A-Ride, which is kind of like a Uber for multiple people at the same
Okay.
time. So it would pick you up at your house, but it might pick up other people and drop them off on the way. And
Wow.
I would go with her sometimes and take my notebook with me. And I would sit in the back of the Dial-A-Ride bus and I would make notations about other people's behavior. But I think that came from the book Harriet the Spy, which I had read. So
Yeah,
it was
okay.
like, I've always been a writer as long as I can remember. So that was just a let me be Harriet the Spy and I'll write about people and make up stories
That's
about their
that's a good
lives.
wholesome way to pick up that trait. I like that. Yeah, the people who are reading Harriet the Spy and Encyclopedia Brown, the books that taught kids critical thinking. Maybe that's where that came from. I like that. Do you have a shot for me before we continue on?
I do. I'm going to go with F4.
F4. That is a miss. I know. Without like digging too much in the book, because the book only takes place like it for me, it felt like it took place over like 3 or 4 days. And I'm not quite sure about the time frame, but that's because I binge read that. Like actually I had an audiobook which was a treat in itself because the guy who they chose to read, can't remember his name. Do you remember his name right offhand?
Oh, yeah, Robbie Damon.
There we go. Robbie Damon. Yeah. One of the voices for Spider-Man back in the 90s, actually. Great voice actor. Brought your book to life. And like I said, it was within a day that I read it. So you don't get to see what happens to Josh as he grows up, as he becomes an adult and takes all of these experiences with him and becomes whatever he becomes. But you have, you've grown up. You said you're just still processing. Um, what are some of the biggest traits that you feel in your life are in direct response to losing such a big part of your space at a young age?
I think that I processed some of that in writing the character of Gran. I just want to say I am not Gran.
It's
No one in
good
my life, yeah, no one in my life is that just
because
inherently
Gran
not a
Gran
good
was
person.
horrible.
She was a horrible person,
Yeah,
but her own choices were limited when
that's true.
she went through some very difficult things and she was really struggling. And as she says in the book, she's already raised her kids and now here she is with two more and she just
Yeah,
isn't down for that. And should she be? Does she have to? And that's one of the questions I was exploring, like, do you have an inherent obligation to take responsibility for other people's choices? She didn't choose to have those kids and now they're handed to
yeah,
her.
yeah. Good
Yeah.
point.
So, yeah, I mean, I think I was through the character of Gran, I was exploring this opposite of hoarder. So, no one in my life is a hoarder, but I kind of have this tendency to not let things matter very much, let items matter
Yeah,
very much
right.
to me. So, when someone gives me a gift, I'm grateful for it. It has that meaning attached to it. But if I were to lose that, I wouldn't have a huge meltdown. It's the momentary, they loved me and gave me this item that emotional response in the moment that mattered the
Mm,
most to me. It's like that the personification of it's the thought that matters. That's actually how I feel about things. If,
okay.
I just don't feel the need to collect things. And that was really helpful. I went through a kind of a not great divorce and we had a lot of things in our home and he wanted to keep most of them and I
Right.
didn't fight because it wasn't the things that mattered, it was the relationships with my kids and
Yeah,
I wanted to keep that civil with their father instead of fighting over all these things. And I think if I hadn't had that core mentality of items in your life are not what's important, I
sure.
might have fought harder in relationships.
So that probably pretty much shaped your love language going forward too. You're not so much of a physical gift needer, but more of like actions or maybe words of affirmation or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, like
Yeah,
flowers are always good, but
sure.
it's they're not going to stick around forever either. So
Right, right. So do you think maybe it shaped your relationship with people at all with the way that you handle relationships, like a come and go type situation?
no, I think I have deep, deep bonds and deep connection. I don't see people as disposable. there's a lot of stuff, we all have stuff.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff in my family history growing up and relationships with extended family, and that has shaped things. I think that the one thing the house burning down did for me is it showed me that you don't have to be completely alone when there's
Okay.
trauma. And so the way the community came together and helped our family so that, the neighbor down, my babysitter donated her dresser. So I had a place to put the clothes that other people donated instead of just piles in this apartment. Somebody donated dolls I was a little bit old for dolls at that point, but it meant something that they cared enough to give me a doll. And, I saw community as a resource, not in a way that you like exploit the resource, but like as
Right.
in you have people to lean on, you're not in this alone. And I've continued to think of it that way. And that's one of the themes in Junkyard Dogs is Josh has to figure out that, his family might not be great at supporting him and being there for him, but there are other people around who can be there and help him.
Right. Yeah, all this talk about book writing and whatnot, I feel like it's a good space for this ad read. So this podcast, shamelessly, is brought to you by my own book, Dink. That's right, D&D in the coffin hold of the USS Enterprise. It may not have burning buildings or evil grandmothers, but it does have a bunch of coming of age and great stories about being in the military and trying not to be depressed. Pick it up in Amazon or wherever you get your digital books. And I'm hoping that everybody is going to get a chance to read that, including you. Yeah, including you. I want everyone to read it. So, I'm just going to, shamelessly say, hey, read my book.
Awesome. I have your book.
Good. I had a guy who said, all right, I'm flying to Europe. Now I have time to read your book. I'm like, okay, hey, that's fine. Read the book on the plane. It's a plane book. I am perfectly fine with that. I am calling out I-9.
I-9 is a miss.
Ooh.
No
Now,
hits so far. Neither one of us have hit anything.
I will tell you this, and I can't obviously do this on paper. It would be too messy, too many scratch outs and anything. But when I used to play with my brother when I was younger, my idea was that boats are in the ocean and they move. So,
So you cheated. That's what
yeah, I would put flashes, Assure you, none of my ships, they're all stationary, ink on paper today. Yes, they are, to their detriment. All right, so you value people, you value relationships. Things can come and go because you've seen it happen. Do you ever feel like you are on edge that something might happen in the future to the point where maybe like you're constantly warning yourself or you're making sure that others are safe all the time? Like, is there any of that happening?
Yeah, there is a hypervigilance that comes with having
That's
lost
the term.
something so consequential as your entire home. The current home I live in does not have a fire extinguisher, and I'm very aware of that. The home I lived in before this had a fire extinguisher. This home that I live in now has a gas stove, and that is slightly terrifying for me. If there's even a hint of any smell, I'm like, is that gas? Are you sure that's not gas? So I'm on top of, fire extinguishers or what are they called? Fire smoke detectors.
Yeah.
All have the batteries, our carbon monoxide
Monitors.
monoxide.
Yeah.
That has up-to-date batteries, and I've got one in the basement right outside my kids' room. I remodeled the house so it would have an egress room when we put a basement bedroom in. So there is that just true fear of we don't have a leaf pickup in our neighborhood. Nobody comes and picks up the fall leaves. And so, if you live in a state that has 3 seasons, it's really important to be able to get rid of those leaves.
Yes.
We have a lot of oak trees, and we would rake them into a fire pit now and burn them. But when my husband's doing that, I'm like, unless the hose can reach out to that fire pit, unless you're standing out there, unless you have a metal rake,
sure.
Like I can't, it's very hard.
Chuckling only because you're smiling at yourself because I mean, you've lived with your own hypervigilance. So at this point, it's easier for you to kind of, laugh at that. It's like, yeah, I'm the crazy mom always thinking about fire.
But I will tell you, I wasn't home one day and my mother called me because she lives with me because she's elderly. She called me and the neighbors had accidentally set their field on fire and the fire was coming across toward our property. It melted the fence between our 2 properties. So yes, it's hypervigilance, but is it though?
Yeah, fire's always around the corner. So let me ask you: Is there a point where you're going to be like, I'm getting rid of that gas stove? Like, you going electric
I'm
sometime soon?
It's gonna die on its own eventually. It's
Uh,
already, it's so old. It's a beautiful antique
oh,
looking stove, but the oven itself is not, it's like a small little oven, like the size of my computer screen. It's hard to put
okay.
anything in it. So it needs to go, but not because it's gas.
Gotcha. Well, do you have a shot for me?
I
Try to
do.
grab one of my
Let's,
ships.
I know if you don't move them.
That's true.
Okay.
They are stationary.
I'm gonna go H5.
H. Oh, snap. That's a hit.
Yeah.
That's a hit. You are now in the lead. Congratulations. Well, you can't just sit there and not retaliate immediately. D6.
D6. What? That's also a hit.
Now we're even. I've, I have done the thing. I've made the shots. There were times, a couple of times in the book, that the character Josh had flashbacks due to sense of smell or very smell. I mean, smell is one of the biggest memory triggering things out there. But, where he would just kind of like flash back to that moment of seeing and just being enveloped in the past. Do you ever have moments like that?
No, I do have, I can still smell what it was like when the house was on fire, and especially after the house burned down. Uh, my dad let us walk through the burnt down house after it, days later when everything was done smoldering. And I remember the smell of the melted washing machine, that
Yeah,
metal, like I can smell it. And we're talking 40 years later, I can smell that.
right.
And I think that when I smell things burning, sometimes makes me remember it, but it doesn't take me back. And I think the big difference is I wasn't in the house.
That's true.
Like, I think I had a little bit of removal there in terms of the experience. I was watching it, but I wasn't living it the way that Josh in the story, he's in the house when it's on fire and he's
Right.
not sure where his brother is, where his mother is. That's a whole nother level of trauma.
Yeah. I've always found this interesting for people who create situations like that. Where did you pull that kind of deep emotional trauma response from then? Was it talking to other people? Was it just you following your own mental process of what it might have been like?
I think it was me. It was thinking it through of like, okay, we could have died there. What if we hadn't, gone to school that day like my mother thought? But it's also, it's not the only loss I've had in my life. And I think that there's been other situations in my life where I've felt paralyzed by what's happening around me. And that kind of informed that complete abject terror moment of I don't know how to stop this. I don't know what's going on.
Okay. Well, we've got a little bit of inches left in this pool to dive down into. Do you want to talk about one of the other? No? No? Okay, that's fine. That's all right. We'll tread water a little bit. I'm down with that. I'll tell you what, call another shot real quick, and then I'll think about what the heck I was about to just ask.
All right. Sorry to like say no to that, but it's a
No,
little
it's
bit.
okay. No. I mean, that actually helps me remember what I was going to say. So call your other shot. I know where we're going after
My
this.
shot. Okay, so since I have a hit here, I'm gonna go H4.
That's a miss. It's a saving grace right there. You said that you're still processing this. And it's been, X amount of years later, because who am I to age you on a podcast that, that people don't know you that well. What methods are you using to process this? Are you seeing a therapist? Is it just a personal journey?
I wound up not seeing a therapist at the time of the fire because that wasn't a value trait that my family of origin had.
Okay.
My father has literally said nobody can read a book and tell you how you feel. And I'm like, well, that is actually not the point of therapy at all. And if you'd ever been in therapy, you would understand that they're not trying to tell you how you feel. They're trying to help you build resilience and mechanisms to handle
Yes.
the things that are happening to you and to be able to look for ways to lift yourself up and get the support you need. And so I wound up, I will tell you, I did lose a baby when I was at term. So when we lost that baby, and then shortly after that, I'll tell you this too, my uncle was murdered and they found him
I'm
burned
so
to
sorry.
death in the trunk of his car. And so that was like, came right on the heels of losing that baby. And
Oh, wow.
that the phone call of, had been close to my uncle as a child, but I hadn't talked to him in a couple years. But it was like my uncle died, not just died, but was horrifically murdered by fire.
Ooh,
And
that doesn't
I
help
had
your case at all.
just buried a child, and then it just pulled me all back to all the trauma was all on top of me all at once. It wasn't I had dealt with anything about the childhood fire. It wasn't that I had processed, even though I thought I had processed all these things individually. But
Right,
in the moment of experiencing another trauma, it all piled on me in a way that I was on the bathroom floor. I'd been in the middle of giving my other kid a bath when I got the phone call about my uncle, and I was on the
right,
bathroom floor unable to function. And luckily, my husband at the time was there and came in and was able to finish the bath and get me off the floor. And but his comment to me was that it wasn't about me, that my uncle's death wasn't about me, that losing the baby hadn't been my fault. Like he was trying to
right.
say the right thing at the time. But he's remember if it was him or someone else who said it was like God's will, that you can't fight God's will, that these things just happen. And in that moment, I was like, done. Like no more.
Right.
Nobody can give me anything else. I am not getting out of this bed. And so I did go to therapy. I was able to, through the help of an antidepressant, I was able to start to process. It's a life journey
Of
processing
course.
the
Of
things that have
course.
happened. But without the therapy and without the antidepressant, I don't know that I just don't know how that would have resolved. So
Right.
I'm very thankful that he was able to help get me help at the time, because just there's some things you can't carry by yourself and you shouldn't
No.
have to.
And a lot of times, depending on where you grew up, depending on what your family's like, you get the advice when bad things happen, like kind of like just a shrug. It's like, hey, bad things
Mhm.
happen. You just got to keep moving.
Yeah.
Store that shit away, cry about it later.
Throw some
Um,
dirt on it.
yeah. And then the next thing you know, something comes up and it's uprooting everything, and you're just looking at the fetid mess of everything in your past, which is what happened to you. Which, man, all that happening at once. I'm so sorry about that. But I'm glad that you had somebody around you who was, you got the therapy, you got the meds that you needed. And have you ever ran into anybody in your family or anybody that you know now who knows that you might take an antidepressant and, ask, hey, why are you on drugs? Like, can't you just handle it yourself?
Yeah. And to be, transparent, I'm not on the antidepressants anymore.
Okay.
It's been years. That was years ago, and I haven't had to sustain that, but I
Mhm.
know that it's a resource I can turn to again. And so that's also been helpful because I'm
That's good.
monitoring my own emotional need at the moment. And I would definitely go back on antidepressants if I needed to. I haven't needed that right now.
Good.
But there is that stigma. Like,
There is.
why do you need medication to cope with life? Everybody has it difficult.
Right.
Why can't you just, pull up your big girl panties and be fine? And it's like being on medication is a way of being fine. That
Yeah.
is being fine.
Yeah.
Not recognizing when you need help, not getting on medication is not fine. That there was a long period in my life where I would literally picture problems as putting them in a box,
Hmm.
putting the box on a shelf, and then behind a brick wall. And
Okay.
that's exactly why everything fell on me when my
Yeah.
uncle died, is because all these boxes were just stacked up and not dealt with. And that's not healthy. That's not fine.
I like how between different people that I talk to, everybody's got their own mental metaphor of what it looks like to suppress, to forget, to worry about it later, burying or storing it away or burning it or shipping it away. When I was young, I used to think about like all the bad things that was happening to me. I'd say up till about 25, I used to do this, and I would have like little meditation moments of envisioning a very sharp horizon line and just sending everything to it until it just disappeared. And yeah, I wasn't processing anything. Like, as I found out when I started therapy and then wrote my book, which has a lot of very cathartic things to write in there as far as traumas that had happened to me and how I grew up, realized that, yeah, I wasn't dealing with none of it. I was just ignoring it, putting a smile on my face.
Because that's what we're told to do.
Exactly. So whose shot is it? Is it
I
mine? I
think
think it's
it's your
mine.
shot.
I think it's
Yeah.
mine. Let's do E6.
Oh, that is another hit.
Oh.
Wait, last time when I hit something, you got to fire back right away. So since you hit something, I'm going to fire
Go
back.
ahead. As
All
is your right.
So I'm going to say G5.
G5. That is a miss. That's a strategic placing. But I promise you it's not. It hasn't been. The more I say that, the more guiltier I sound, but I promise you.
I think you protest too much.
Yeah. I'm glad we had this second go around. Because one, I'm a little bit more practiced on talking with people now. I feel like I'm more comfortable with the process. And like during one of my last conversations, I got to ask somebody, were they glad that their mom died? Which is a strong question. I mean, there's actually a couple of good things I think that came from what you were saying as far as what you've developed. As far as there's the hypervigilism, is making sure that people are safe. You have a stronger bond when it comes to the people around you because you know that, loss can happen. And because you know that loss can happen, you're not necessarily holding on to physical items, which for some people that's huge. That's unimaginable because physical items are kind of all they have, especially in a consumerizing or consumer-based economy. But is there anything about the experience that you're like, maybe not, hey, I'm glad my house burned down, but you know that because that happened, you're stronger in a certain way? Is there a strength that you recognize out of that?
I mean, that's kind of echoing back to what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I would much rather be stronger without having go through all the stuff that
Well,
we've
of
had
course.
to go through. But I do feel like you can't experience tremendous joy if you haven't felt sorrow. You need the balance in life of these ups and downs to be able to really appreciate where you are and what you've done and who the people around you are. I learned to rely on other people a little bit more than I might have if my house hadn't burned down, because just seeing the way the community came forward, it also made me more giving because it happened, once I'd been an adult, there was somebody in the area whose home burned down. It happens all the time. But I was able to then, help a little bit with that. And I might not have been I don't know who I would have been without having my own losses.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm reminded it's a big point in video games and books, and a lot of media has, there's no light without the darkness, there's no darkness without the light. Life is very much about balance, and some people let one side or the other sweep them away. I mean, you can kind of tell which side is like, if you find somebody who's like a little too happy and doesn't want to talk about the negative, you're kind of wondering, well, what's happened to you that you want to bury that? And then there's the other way around where they're so gloom and doom. You're like, oh goodness, how can we help you process what's ever happened? But we can't fix everybody as much as I want to. Like, I'm a big like, hey, what can I do to help? Even though, like, knowing sometimes I'm not in a position to help. But again, hey, I'm going to therapy for all this. So let's do one more round of shots on Battleship, not alcohol, because I'm diabetic. That's a bad idea. Let's see. I believe I did the last one, so go ahead.
No, I think I did the last one.
Oh, you did. You're right. I'm reading this wrong. Okay. Then let's say C6.
This is a hit.
All right. So is that a full ship, or is there still more hits on that?
Yeah, you have not sunk anything.
I hadn't sunk anything. All right.
But I'm going to counterfire.
Go for it.
So I'm going to say I5.
I5. Oh dear. Okay, I'm gonna give
moving
you
these ships.
That was a miss. I'm gonna give you one more shot, just to give you continuity, and also because I'm a sporting host.
It'd be really funny if I didn't call the shot that I should call.
Yeah, I know, right?
No, let's go H6.
H6. That is a hit, and also no sinking there. Full disclosure, you were hitting on my aircraft carrier. Have you ever done whenever you were playing Battleship, do you ever do the thing where it's like all around the ring and just like have a big field of nothing? Yeah, in the center. Yeah. And you only get away with that for a couple of times before like the other person, like next time they play, they just start getting all the rims, like.
I've also clumped them all in the middle before, just layered them together. That doesn't usually end well.
No. I will tell you from I think anybody who's watched any kind of military anything, you don't put all your assets in one area and just let somebody get shelled. So this is the moment where you get to talk about the things that you have done, that you are doing. Plug away, Kat. Plug away.
It's hard to like trumpet your own horn sometimes,
I know.
but yeah. So who am I? What am I doing? Junkyard Dogs came out in 2023 in February, so that was huge. I'm super excited. I'm doing book
Yay.
tours and school visits related to that. So I was just up in Rochester Hills, Michigan, near Detroit yesterday. There was a school district that did my book for the Battle of the Books, and then
Oh.
they challenged me to a trivia contest about my own book.
Oh, that's
So
great.
that was interesting. I only
How'd you
missed
do?
three. I missed 3 out of 20 questions, but to be fair, those were things that changed during revision.
Okay.
Who died and when, like that changed the
Nice.
revision process. And then I'm working on another book. Well, first of all, Junkyard Dogs will come out in paperback in April this year. So I'm super
Nice.
excited about that. It'll reach a whole new group of readers. And then I'm working on another story. It's a ghost story. It's also about loss. It's also about family dynamics and who's there for you and why. And this story is its tentative title is Twisted Roots, but we'll see if we get to keep that during revision process.
Sure.
And it's the story of a mother and a child who are playing hide and go seek, and the little boy goes missing during that game of hide and go
Oh,
seek.
okay. Well, where can people find you?
They can find me online at Write with Cat. That's my website. I'm also on Instagram and Twitter and X and TikTok. I have a couple TikTok videos, so
Hey,
I'm
look at
learning.
you. Look at you.
And also Junkyard Dogs is wherever books are sold. So
Nice, nice. Yeah, I was actually revisiting the Junkyard Dogs area on Amazon, and yeah, the paperbacks are available for pre-order right now. And
awesome.
yeah, I saw that, and I was like, hey, good for her. And the
Yeah.
reviews are pretty good, except for like a couple of them that I saw where they're like, it's a downer, and I'm like,
Yeah.
did you read the jacket? Like, you know what you were getting into? Like, I knew that like this was going to be it, the cover and just having writing with you before. I know you can get dark and gritty, so I was so excited to do it. It was a journey. I loved it. What can I say? I could keep
Yeah.
gushing about you for hours, but this isn't that kind of podcast. And
I will say reviews are so hard. You know, they're hit or miss, just like Battleship. It's
yes,
like if it's the book you
nice,
wanted
good
to
for
read
you.
at the time, you know, then you're going to love it. If it's not the book you're looking for, like one person literally gave me a 1 star and said, I'm very disappointed it wasn't a biography about my friend. But Junkyard Dogs, to be fair, one of the inspirations was the manhole murders that happened in South Bend, Indiana in 2006. There were
Yeah.
4 men found dead
Oh,
in the
okay.
manhole covers. And so that does play into the story a little bit. So I think he went into it thinking it was about one of the deceased men that actually died in the
Oh,
manholes in
okay.
South Bend. But
Um,
still,
I'm
the
glad you
cover.
brought that up because I know we mentioned that last time that we had a recording, but I had forgotten to reiterate for, this fresh recording that's actually going to be heard by people that, you weren't involved with a bunch of murders that happened in the area.
Right.
Yeah,
It's
that
not.
there wasn't that much trauma going on. And well, and of course, everybody can find me pretty much anywhere at Sittin with You, no G. Plug myself. It's my own podcast. Why not, right?
You should.
Yeah, and I've also been working on my outro, which it took 4 episodes to finally get out, and it's pretty much just a rehash of the intro. I have been your host, Michael LeBlanc, and if you happen to miss next month's episode, well, still, it's your loss. Kat, it's been great.
Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. Hope you have a great day, and to everybody out there listening, have a great day as well. Bye-bye.